Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure of announcing to you that we are going to make an effort to repeat the old reveille. 1, 2, 3.
Howdy! Welcome to Cimarron's Big Guns. Today we are here with former Texas Ranger Joe Davis. How are you today?
Doing great.
Happy Halloween.
Same to
Halloween.
you.
It's a very festive thing to do on Halloween.
And I'm really not wearing my mask today. It's really me, so okay.
So let's just kind of start at the beginning. Like when you were growing up, what did you think about the Texas Rangers?
Well, that's what really got me interested in becoming a Texas Ranger. When I was growing up, of course, back in that day, Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, Hopalong Cassidy, all those young kids today don't even recognize their names. I grew up in that era, and that was the good guy always wore the white hat. The bad guy was the real bad guy, and you didn't want to be the bad guy. You want to be the good guy. And during that time, they also had a radio program called Tales of the Texas Rangers. And I listened to it because we didn't have TV back then. We listened to the radio or went to the movies and saw Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and them. So Tales of the Texas Rangers was on in the 50s, early 50s, and Joe McRae, who you probably know was a movie star and played a good Western cowboy, was the voice of the Ranger. And then when TV came out, they had a program on TV called Tales of the Texas Rangers, which I got interested in from the radio then to TV. And I thought it was great. Here we had the modern day Ranger, still riding a horse when he needed it, investigating and arresting the bad guys. And then in school, I was in Texas, you're required to take Texas history in the 4th and 7th grade. So when I was in the 4th and 7th grade, I also learned about the Texas Ranger and his role in the development of this state. So that really influenced me. I'd either want to be a baseball player or a Texas Ranger. I was big in baseball back then and then Texas Ranger. So when I became, well, actually go back, when I was 14, I wrote Colonel Homer Garrison a letter. He was the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety and the chief of the Texas Rangers. The Rangers are under the Department of Public Safety, is a branch of them, like the Highway Patrol is. And so I wrote him inquiring about the Texas Rangers and asked him if he had a spare Ranger badge he could send me. Well, he wrote me back and said, well, we don't really send out Ranger badges, but I can have one made for you that's the old style. And he mailed it to me along with a little book on the Texas Rangers and the history of them. And so I got that when I was 14.
Do you still have that?
I still have.
Oh, that's good.
Matter of fact, the badge and the letter is framed in my office right now.
Yeah.
And then the little book that he sent is in my file that he sent about the history of the Rangers. So anyway, I received that, and then when I became 21, I was working actually at the time for the Texas Highway Department on a survey crew. And it's strange that a lot of the early day Rangers were surveyors, but that's what I was doing. And I didn't know it at the time. So when I turned 21, I really had that wanted to be and thought a Texas Ranger. So I wrote him again, Colonel Garrison, and he sent me a letter back with an application to join the DPS. In the letter he said, you can't just join the Texas Rangers, you have to have so many years of experience in law enforcement, then you can apply when there's an opening. He said, but first you really need to fill out this application and go to a recruit training school. We'll investigate you and do that, and if you're accepted, you'll go through the school. So I filled it out, sent it back to him, and the next thing I know, a guy's calling me from the DPS wanted to come out and interview me. Went through that process, and make a long story short, I was accepted to the DPS recruit school in 1963 and went through it, became a highway patrolman, stationed in Houston and Katy, Then in 1968, they were adding some new intelligence agents who did criminal investigations. One of the services on the DPS beside the Rangers and Highway Patrol is the DPS Intelligence Section, who go out, they work in plain clothes, they gather information on known criminals and subversive groups and so forth. And so I thought that would be good to maybe get into that, because to maybe help make Ranger one day, get the experience. And sure enough, I applied for that and went for the interview board and all, and made intelligence agent. Still stayed in Houston. And then in 1969, they added 10 men to the Rangers, and some of the Rangers were retiring because they had reduced the retirement age from 70 to 65, state did. So a lot of the Rangers were at that point in their life between 65 and 70. A lot of them didn't want to retire, but they were forced to because of that law. And at the same time, the legislature added 10 more Rangers to the list. So there were several openings. So I went ahead and applied, took the test, went to the interview board, and was fortunate to be appointed. I was 28 years old, one of the youngest Rangers at the time, and I always tell everybody I was just at the right place at the right time. So I made Ranger in October 1st, 1969, and went to Austin as was my first station, which Austin at that time was about 250,000 people. It's just a big country town. But it was a good station because being a new Ranger and being stationed at headquarters, you got to know what was all available to you as an investigator, with the crime labs being there, polygraph, a lot of other things there at headquarters. So you learned a lot quicker. And once you become a Ranger, your education in criminal investigation just starts, because then you start going to all these schools, how to investigate every type of crime, from murder to armed robbery to burglary. Blood splatter school at a crime scene, there's certain things you look for, and tells you a lot about what happened in that room, how to lift fingerprints, just everything about criminal investigation. So you're constantly going to these schools. I could probably have a master's or doctorate degree in college or more from the schools they send you to.
I read that you said that in some ways that being a highway patrolman was almost more dangerous than being a Texas Ranger.
Well, out there, and the reason I probably said that is when you're out there on the highway patrol, I was in Houston and working by yourself, and you're stopping cars out there, and you really don't know what you stop sometimes. A lot of highway patrolmen may be stopping a speeder running 80, 90 miles an hour, but he may have just robbed a bank, or he may have just killed someone, leaving the scene. So it is dangerous, and it's still that way out there, more so maybe even than when I was working, because of more things going on out there, especially with the drugs and the cartels and all that. And so I was fortunate. I really didn't have any real problem. In 5 years I was a highway patrolman. Only had one incident where a guy kind of jumped on me, and we took care of that, but put him in jail. But
that might be a good segue to. I also read that when you were becoming a Texas Ranger, there was a boxing component involved.
Yeah, boxing. Usually was that in the recruit school?
I believe.
Yeah, so. In that recruit school, we started with 68 people, and 28 actually graduated. So you can see they started dropping out like fleas off of a duck. And what happens is there's a lot of physical training. And one of the things is boxing. And nobody looks forward to that. And they'll tell you you're going to get whipped at least once in that school. And so I started looking around in the classroom, trying to figure out who I really didn't want to have to fight. And his name was Eddie Bentley. He's about the only one I remember the name of because of what happened. But so Eddie was from up in the Panhandle, and he's about 6'4" and just like this, lean and mean. trim and good shape. And of course, we got us all in good shape. But Eddie was the guy that I looked at and said, "Boy, I'd hate to have to fight him." Well, they started boxing during the school, and there was one match before me, and they called out my name, and then they said Eddie Bentley.
Oh.
And I looked over at the guy next to me, and I said, "Who did he say?" He said, "Eddie Bentley." I said, "Oh God." So anyway, Eddie, and I boxed a little bit as I was growing up in a boys club, but so I figured I better hit him first. Well, it didn't happen that way. Before I even thought I was close enough to swing at him, he had arms that much longer than mine. And I remember seeing the glove coming, and it went right between my two and hit me right here. And it just kind of, where I couldn't see it, everything turned black. He didn't knock me down, but we fought for several minutes. Then he knocked me down several times.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but.
So what are some of the more memorable cases that you worked on as a Texas Ranger?
Well, probably the most memorable is the one that happened here in Kerrville in the early 80s, right after I moved to Kerrville. We had a nurse that came in named Janine Jones. There's been a lot in the paper about her lately. She's fixing to be paroled, but Janine Jones came into Kerrville with a Dr. Holland, who was a pediatrician, and they were setting up a practice. And Janine had been a nurse down in San Antonio at a hospital there. During her time there, unbeknown to everybody in Kerrville, there were some suspicious deaths that occurred in San Antonio of young babies. And the doctors were started noticing it and knew something had to be wrong. And when they started looking at it, all these deaths were occurring on the same shift at night. And it happened to be during Janine Jones' shift. And to make a long story short, this pediatrician was doing her residency down there and was fixed to move to Kerrville, and she was asking these doctors, she was wanting to find a nurse. Well, the doctors were concerned enough to get Janine out of the hospital, so they recommended her. They really messed up because they should have reported to the police. Later, a lot of them, after it was found out what happened, was dismissed and all, but they knew that their reputation was at stake because they didn't know how many babies had died, and they hadn't reported it. And so it was a bad deal. And anyway, she shows up in Kerrville, Dr. Holland and Janine Jones, and shortly thereafter, these young babies were having seizures at her office. And so every day they were running an ambulance from Dr. Holland's office to the emergency room. And then one of them died. Well, the doctors in Kerrville got suspicious because they'd never had these problems before. Matter of fact, there was only one pediatrician prior to that in Kerrville. And Dr. Holland moved up there. But anyway, they got to looking at it too immediately. And one of the babies that was in the emergency room, as an anesthesiologist was walking by, was coming to and wiggling its arms, and the anesthesiologist felt like, looked at that and said it kind of looks like a baby coming out of a drug that he used in his practice called succinyl chlorine chloride. An anesthesiologist will give you that drug to, when they intubate you for surgery, where they can insert that tube, it kind of relaxes you, and you can insert that tube prior to surgery, and that's what they use. And you have to be careful with it because it goes by weight and so forth. Well, that's it. When they got suspicious, one of the babies ended up dying, and so they immediately contacted the Board of Nursing, and then I got a call one day from one of their investigators that this was going on, and they wanted me to investigate it. So that's how I got involved in it. Yeah. And it was a lengthy investigation because that drug disperses in your blood in just a matter of seconds. So I went over and started interviewing a lot of people, got a hold of the district attorney, and we started a grand jury investigation, and it took about a year to do to gather the evidence. But everything started falling into place through everything we did, and we found a doctor in Sweden named Bo Homestead, who was he had won a Nobel Prize winner one time, and he was coming into California, and we went out and met with him and told him what we were doing, and we actually had to exhume that baby and do another autopsy to get some organs so we could test them. So it's a long process, but in the long run, through that and the evidence and through him checking, found the drug, that made our case. And we tried her and had to move the case down to Georgetown, Williamson County, and she got 99 years. Back in those days, the law was that you serve a third of the sentence and you're eligible for parole. The reason being the prisons were overcrowded at that time. It's not that way now. And so that's why she's coming up for parole and has been up several times and been denied. But now she's up to getting out on her own next year. But San Antonio has been looking into some of the cases and they have indicted her, so she may not get out.
Good.
But that was probably the worst one I ever did because the circumstances around it. You'd have to know Janine Jones had a big ego and she was trying to prove to everybody she knew everything.
Wow.
But Scholarford, she'd get mad at a doctor and tell the doctor in San Antonio, this baby needs to be treated this way or that way, and the doctor would tell her, say, look, I'm the doctor, you're the nurse, I know how to treat them, you do as I say. She didn't like that.
Yeah.
So she made the babies go down, give them something to make them sick or sicker. Some of them died, but she was trying to prove her point to the doctor. Bad thing.
Oh, it's a heavy one. I've read about it, I think, in Texas Monthly recently.
Yeah, they've had. Matter of fact, I just had a reporter in last week from San Antonio Express News that's interviewed me about that. I guess they'll have a story coming out sometime near future on it.
So when you have to deal with such heavy stuff on a day-to-day basis, like how do you balance that with your family? Like, I know being a Texas Ranger isn't like a 9-to-5 job. So.
No, it's not. It's you're actually 7 days a week, 24 hours a day on duty, and you got to have a wife that's really very supportive. And I was fortunate I had one because she never did complain about me being gone. I know there was 2 years in a row. I think one of them was during this Janine Jones deal that I was out working on our anniversary and had to, miss our anniversary day. Or we might be leaving to go visit my parents who lived out of town or hers, and walking out the door and the phone rings and you put the suitcases down and go because you never know when that call's going to come in. You work a regular day job, you're constantly investigating something and try to work it in home with your family. And I raised 3 boys. They all turned out good, thank goodness, knock on wood. And she done a fantastic job. I give her all the credit because I was gone a lot, but I would spend time with them as much as I could too. And still to this day, we just have a boys deal and get together and go to a football game and do a little, just the guys. And anyway, it's hard but like I say, if you have a wife that's understanding and supports you, it makes it easy on me because I knew I did. So now we're trying to make up for lost time.
So you mentioned that you kind of got interested in being a Texas Ranger from the radio program that turned into TV. It seems that Hollywood is a little obsessed with Texas Rangers, so I wanted to know why you think that is, and what did they get right, what did they get wrong?
Yeah, most of it's wrong. We cringe as a ranger. Most rangers will kind of cringe when they say, oh, they're fixed to make a movie about the Texas Rangers. And we say, oh God, we can make it. And Hollywood has a way of blowing things plumb out of too much, Hollywood in it. And if they would stick mainly to the facts and show it, and they have made one or two that not too bad, but most of them are so outrageous that it doesn't happen in chases and blowing up this and blowing up that.
We're talking about Lone Wolf McQuade. We're talking about Chuck Norris.
Yeah, you know what Chuck Norris did, and a lot of people watched it, but I hardly ever did. But and Chuck Norris is a great guy, and he did a good job. It's just so far fetched from what the real Ranger did. I mean, we weren't taught all that. His partner looked more like the Ranger part than Chuck. But Chuck did a good. And the thing about that show was, when that came on, a lot of people didn't even know the Texas Ranger still existed. And so they showed a modern day Ranger out there working, even though it was, well, and they have to do it to make people, I understand Hollywood and, you know, why they do things to make it interesting for people to watch. If it, you know, a Texas Ranger's job is probably pretty dull when it comes down to, if you want to see it, because you're out there talking to people and investigating. You very seldom get in an actual shootout or a fight or something. It's mainly interviewing people and taking statements, trying to solve a crime, and it's not this wild chase and shooting. But it did bring forth that there was a Ranger out there, and which is good. And he dressed close to a Ranger, but wore what the Ranger badge looked like. You know, the Rangers are all about tradition and history, so they still wear the hat, the boots, the badge is made from a Cinco Peso coin that, like they used to make them, and so there's a lot of history and tradition there. So Hollywood is still keeps the Ranger going, but it's so far from what the Ranger actually does most of the time that you don't really get the effect. You know, they had one, what was one here a while back, that the last one they made, I'm trying to...
Hell or High Water?
Yeah, yeah. That was Jeff
Bridges.
Yeah, Jeff Bridges, and he did a pretty good job in that.
Now, I had heard that Ranger Joaquin Jackson was the advisor on that.
Yeah.
Jeff Bridges took a lot of his mannerisms.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joaquin helped on several movies out there. But it goes back, you like to have a Ranger out there as a technical advisor because it kind of shows how they dressed and how they did. And even with that show that I did when I was growing up, Tales of the Texas Rangers, we had a Ranger served in the earlier years, retired in the 50s as a captain named Lone Wolf Gonzalez. And when he retired in the 50s, he was captain in Dallas. And he went out to Hollywood and became the technical advisor on that show, Tales of the Texas Rangers, because that whole show, they got permission from DPS to do actual cases that had occurred. So it was really pretty good. And they had a Ranger that was the advisor out there then.
Can you talk a little bit about the former Texas Ranger Foundation and the Heritage Center that is being built here in Fredericksburg?
Yeah, and let me go back just a little bit on that. Our former Texas Ranger Association first is made up, it was formed or established in 1897 by an older group of Texas Rangers that served in the Frontier Battalion. Back in those days, they camped out and lived together and out in the Indian problem, outlaw problem. So when they got out of the service and served their time, they missed each other, actually, and they started writing letters to each other, and they decided, let's get together. And they did in Austin in 1897, and they decided to form what was then known as the Ex-Ranger Association, which was the beginning. And it's made, and today it's called the Former Texas Ranger Association. One of the modern day captains says there's not an ex-ranger. Once a ranger, always a ranger, just like the Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. So they changed the name to the Former Texas Rangers. So, and we've had a museum in San Antonio since 1936. It was built during the Texas Centennial. And in memory of the Rangers, pioneers, and trail drivers. And we had a small museum in there. And when I became president in the late 90s, our board decided to we got concerned about our artifacts and decided to build something new and something that was state-of-the-art facility, and told mainly about the Rangers a little more in depth and so forth. So we had the Former Texas Ranger Foundation, which was established in 1971 to support the mission of the association. The foundation was established as a 501c3 and so I became president of the foundation. They appointed me, wanted me to head that up, and we got it started and to start raising money to build this new center, which you just mentioned, Texas Ranger Heritage Center, which we're building here in Fredericksburg, and we're doing that, raising the money through the foundation. We actually have, if you're not able to join the association because you're not a former ranger or a descendant of a ranger, we have memberships within the foundation, which I mean, both of y'all are members. Got your badge on right there. And we appreciate your support and all that Cimarron and Texas Jacks have done to support what we're doing out there. Yeah, and then you get, as a member, you get that certificate, which is Cimarron Arms there.
Yeah, proud to be a major.
Yeah, which you're a major at the highest rank. So that's part of one of the ways we're raising the money, through memberships. Starting off, that was one of the first things we did, was make that membership available. And we're also applying to grants and so forth, and individuals to raise the money. In the Texas Ranger Heritage Center, we just opened up phase 1. But it's going to be a state-of-the-art facility, and it's not only going to tell the history and the role of the Texas Ranger in the development of this state, but it's also geared to for the young people, the youth. It's in that age, 4th and 7th grade mainly, to talk to them about certain character traits of the Rangers, like courage, dedication, determination, respect, and integrity, and teach them what those words mean. And the whole point is to make them better citizens. We don't feel like they're getting all that in the schools today, and we get them out there in phase 1. We're already open at phase 1, and I'll tell you a little bit about it in a minute, but we get the kids out to talk to them about those character traits and let them know you only have one chance in life. You can either do it and be somebody, or you can mess it up. And you don't want to mess it up, and you don't want a ranger on your trail. So
that's the worst thing you can hear.
Yeah.
If you're a criminal in Texas, you don't want to hear there's a Texas Ranger out there.
Looking for you, yeah. So we do it with Boy Scouts, school kids and all, and tell them about that, and tell them, you can be anybody you want to be. It's not just given to you. You got to work for it. And if you got, you look at those character traits, and you say, I may want to be a doctor, lawyer, or whatever, and set your goal. You're going to reach a point that it's difficult to reach, but don't let that. You got to have the determination and the dedication and the courage to go forward, regardless of what's blocking you. Get your education, go through that blockage. Nothing's easy in life, and they've got to work for everything. It's not given to you, and so that's part of what we tell them out there. And so we're using phase 1 now out there to bring them in. We're open 5 days a week. What we have out there now, one of the things that's really out there that we really have been wanting to get on the grounds first was the Ranger Ring of Honor. It's a large 30-foot diameter badge that's on the grounds out there. It has those character traits listed around it, but also there's a lot of plaques listed around it that have the names of all the Rangers that have been killed in the line of duty from the very beginning to the present. There's over 500 names on it. So it's a memorial dedicated to the Rangers that served from the very beginning up to the present time. Then we have a large pavilion where we invite people. They have events out there. We set up ranger camps. We've had the Comanche Indians come in at the same time and do a powwow, and just talked to one of them this week. We're setting up the other event in March, having them come down from Oklahoma. We have a tower out there we call Ranger Tower that's about 60 feet tall. It's with a Ranger badge on it. It glows blue at night to remind everybody that law enforcement is out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're the thin blue line that's protecting us, that we go about doing our business without fear of being robbed or killed, hopefully. So that's out there. And then we have an amphitheater. It's going pretty good. And now we're in the Capitol building campaign to finish the main museum, which is really don't tell the story.
Oh, that'll be something.
Yeah.
When did you first become involved with Cimarron Firearms?
Well, of course, I knew Mike Harvey way back, and when he came to Fredericksburg, and got to know him back a ways, and then I knew he was always a big supporter of the Rangers and the West and all, and actually I really got to meet him, I guess, out there in Vegas at that gun show they had several years ago. Yeah, we were out there with our foundation, and he had a booth out there, and that's when I really got to meet and know him. And then Mike approached us one day about doing this firearm, this single action 45, which turned out to be a fantastic revolver, and we were glad to endorse it because it's really a great, a lot of the Rangers, matter of fact, I have one of my personal guns. I've got one of those now, but I also had one that's very similar to that we were talking about Weldon Lister a while ago. They done one for me right after I got in the Rangers, actually. But it's a great pistol. Our foundation was very proud to endorse that pistol because of what it is, and we just appreciate Cimarron Arms and all the support they've given us, because a part of the proceeds on the sale goes to benefit our foundation, help build this phase 2 of what we've been talking about.
We're honored to be part of that, and yeah, it's gonna hear one riot, one Ranger.
And you can be part of helping build the Heritage Center as well by purchasing one of these guns. 5% of the proceeds go to helping them out.
Yeah, been great. It's a great pistol. It's really turned out real well, and all the Rangers I know has heard about it getting one.
Yeah, where old is this 76 short rifle?
This one?
That's it?
Little magnet.
Yeah, it's a magnet. I don't know how magnets work, but
Yeah, that's 76.
Yep, for the death of the devils.
That's actually a copy of an actual rifle that was discovered in Old Mexico by a Texas Ranger who happens to be a friend of mine. But he learned of the original being over there, and he went over there to see it, and then purchased it and brought it back to Texas. He has it now in his collection. And of course, he knew Mike Harvey too.
Yeah.
And he didn't want, really, the story goes, and Ron told me this, he didn't want to fire the original. And so he brought it up to Mike to show him, and Mike fell in love with it too.
Yeah.
And he said, gosh, I'd like to get agree to make a copy of the exact copy of it. And it is. It looks just like it.
Yeah, there's even 7 notches down here. Who knows what they're for, but you know.
Yeah, that's right.
Seven times.
The engraving on the rifle is exactly the same.
Yeah, there's even
Spelling
a spelling error on there.
Yeah, everything. It looks just like the original. Exactly.
Yeah.
Great piece.
Yeah, Mike says this is like the coolest thing that ever came in this office ever, and it was pretty much in this shape. It was all wrapped in oilcloth.
Yeah, he had to take it and really clean it up, and turned out great. And I wish it could talk, the original one, to see, because it had to be with the Texas Rangers somewhere at some time.
Yeah.
Back in its day.
Well, maybe with the internet we can close the gaps, you know.
Yeah.
Someone
That'd
will
be
have
something to try to check out, get the history on.
Yeah.
The lady's still alive. It would be good if somebody could go over there and actually meet with her and try to get a little more information.
Yeah, we'll make it a road
That
trip.
might be something to do, yeah. Who did that?
Paul Persinger.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I figured that was Paul.
Yeah.
He
Just look at the detail on the feathers, and you just think, good night.
does it good. Yeah, he's good. Matter of fact, part of our membership is getting some knives made and ivory handles on them, and he's doing those.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for watching.
Till next time.